He changed my life in so many ways. I missed so many bullets, police, all types of stuff because I was busy with him.
At dawn, the cemetery was supposed to be silent. No footsteps, no movement, just the whisper of wind passing through carved stones. But on July 21st, 2025, Washington D.C. police were confronted with something no training manual prepares you for. A man sprawled across a small child's grave, arms wrapped around the headstone like he was trying to hold onto something that wasn't there anymore. Not a crime scene in the conventional sense. No gunfire, no suspects, no frantic calls for backup. Just a body lying over a memorial, as if refusing to let go of the person beneath the earth. Officers stood still, reading the carved name. Razik. Hours earlier, that same man, the father, had posted a message the world didn't interpret fast enough. A message that read like goodbye. What happened next shattered a city. Welcome to True Crime Watch HD. Before we rewind this timeline of tragedy, subscribe if you haven't, because real stories like this remind us that truth can be stranger and more heartbreaking than fiction. When news spread that a local artist and rapper had died at his son's burial site, people didn't believe it at first. Rumors fly in most tragedies. But this one didn't feel like rumor. It felt like a metaphor too brutal to make up. The man on that grave was Donald "Big Boss Donno" Curtis, someone whose name resonated across Washington, D.C. But our story doesn't begin with murals or music careers. It begins with something deeper. A bond so intense that it rewired a life, and eventually consumed it. If you were scrolling through social media that morning, would you have recognized his final post as a farewell? Would you have commented? Would you have reached out? Hold on to those questions, they matter. Because this isn't just a case about death. It is about the invisible collapse of someone everyone thought was standing strong. Let's rewind. Years before police lifted yellow tape around that graveyard, Donno was known for something entirely different. He was the guy who made broken places look alive, painting murals over neglected walls, teaching kids how to pick up paint instead of violence, performing rap that sounded less like entertainment and more like confessions. People didn't follow him because he was famous. They followed him because he was real. The type who didn't pretend he hadn't struggled. And then one day, life handed him something he didn't know he needed: a son. A little boy named Razik. That moment was more than fatherhood. It was reform. It was rebirth. According to accounts from his own words, Razik changed my life in so many ways. I missed so many bullets, police, all types of stuff because I was busy with him. But if joy rewrites storylines, so does devastation. In early 2021, Razik was only 3 when doctors delivered a diagnosis serious enough to steal sleep from any parent: cancer. Donno's online updates were filled with brave tones, encouraging quotes, tiny victories. But behind those posts lived fear he rarely spoke aloud. Friends say he became quieter. He didn't explode, he folded inward, smiling through storms no one else could see. The truth is, sometimes the strongest people don't broadcast their breaking point. Sometimes they disguise it as resilience. And if you're a parent watching this, imagine sitting beside your child through hospital corridors, holding their hands through chemotherapy, pretending not to cry where they can see you. That was his life. And then came January 9, 2024. Razik's fight ended. The city mourned. But grief didn't stop at the funeral. It followed him home, sat beside him in silence, echoed in rooms once filled with laughter. People thought time would heal him. Time didn't. Months passed. He kept painting, He mentored kids, uplifted new artists, stayed visible. But internally, he was sinking quietly. That silence matters in this case, because silence is where the investigation begins. Friends later described a man who didn't rage. He receded. He stopped showing up to small gatherings. He posted messages online that read like someone trying to hold himself together with thread. And if you've ever seen someone smiling while drowning, that was him. Then came mid-2025. Posts became shorter, more emotional, more raw, until July 21. He typed, "I'm sorry I tried." Those words didn't go viral fast enough. They didn't alarm people fast enough. They didn't stop him. Hours later, he walked where he always went when grief was too heavy. His son's grave. That was the climax we opened with. A father who physically laid himself over the same earth where his child rested, as if death was the only way to be close again. Police confirmed there was no foul play, just a final act of heartbreak. But this story doesn't end there, because his community reacted in a way nobody expected. DC didn't just lose a rapper. They lost someone they considered a guardian of youth. Murals began appearing, this time not painted by him, but painted for him and his son. Tributes didn't sound like fanfare. They sounded like guilt, realization, and awakening. His death pushed conversations people avoided. Mental health, men's grief, parental trauma, and emotional invisibility. Local spaces echoed with the same unanswered question. What happens when the strongest person in the room is the one who needed help the most? And viewers, what do you think? Could someone have reached him? Do communities miss warning signs because we expect strong people to be invincible? Comment below, because your insight matters more than you think. They say grief is like an ocean, calm one moment and drowning the next. But what investigators learned after Donno's passing revealed something darker. For nearly a year, he wasn't swimming, he was sinking. The police scene report noted no struggle, no forced involvement, no indicator of outside harm. This wasn't a crime to solve, it was a tragedy to understand. And what emerged was a portrait of a man eaten alive by sorrow few ever saw. So let's walk through the months that led to that graveyard. Not the public narrative, but the internal one. Because this is where the story sharpens. In the weeks leading to July 21st, 2025, Donno's social media messaging shifted. Public figures often vent online. Fans assumed this was one of those moments. But investigators later reviewed his posts and found a pattern. Not rage, not attention-seeking, resignation, subtle apologies, short messages about trying. A tone weighted with fatigue. Nobody read them as final. People applauded his vulnerability, unaware that vulnerability wasn't catharsis, it was collapse. That is one of the haunting takeaways of this case. Not all cries for help sound like screaming. Sometimes they sound like love letters. Experts looking into the story pointed to something called compounded bereavement. When one overwhelming loss opens the door to older, buried wounds. Donno wasn't just grieving Razik. He was grieving the person he became because of Razik. A version of himself that felt worth living for. Without his son, he faced a question nobody wants to answer. Who am I now? That loss of identity is often more destabilizing than the event itself. Friends later described moments where he would stare at photos longer than conversations lasted, cancel plans without giving reasons, express guilt for not being strong enough. He didn't rant. He dimmed. That silent descent, that is what psychologists refer to as internalized implosion. On the outside, he was functional. Inside, he was deteriorating. And what makes this case chilling is that nobody knew how deep he'd fallen until it was irreversible. Investigators reconstructed his last movements through CCTV footage near the cemetery, social media timestamps, phone tracking, witness accounts. Hear what they learned. He didn't wander. He didn't hesitate. He walked with intention, as if his mind had already decided exactly where it belonged. The cemetery groundskeeper later said he'd seen Donno visit before, sometimes standing silently, sometimes kneeling, sometimes talking out loud, like Razik was still listening. But that morning was different. There was no packing, no long sit before lying down. He arrived, approached the headstone, and lowered himself across it. One investigator described it as the posture of someone embracing, not collapsing. If imagery could speak, this one screamed. He was ready. The reaction that followed wasn't confined to celebrity condolences or funeral ceremonies. It was visceral. People were angry. Not angry at him. Angry that they didn't see it coming. Angry that someone who saved youth from despair succumbed to despair himself. Artists painted new murals, not of Donno holding a mic, but of Donno holding his son. Two figures intertwined. Some questioned whether his death would finally force conversations men avoid. How are you really? Are you sleeping? Do you feel alone? One artist wrote on a memorial wall, "He was there for us, but were we there for him?" That line spread across the city like gospel. Since the case wasn't criminal in nature, the investigation shifted inward, toward intentions, mental state, and final meaning. Police obtained statements from family, friends, and colleagues. One close contact said, "He was functioning, but he wasn't living. It was like he was surviving just long enough to finish something he had already decided." That something appears to be the message he left behind. Which raises the question, was it meant for the public or privately understood by those closest to him? Some say it was a plea. Some say it was a goodbye. Others say it was an extension of a conversation he'd been having with grief since the funeral. Whatever its interpretation, it was final. That letter shifted this case from heartbreak to warning. The most interesting part of this story is not the tragedy. It's the reaction. Communities that once idolized hardened masculinity began talking openly about breakdowns, unresolved trauma, and vulnerability. Workshops formed. Murals doubled. Youth groups used his story as real-life caution when speaking to teenagers battling grief, violence, or abandonment. Pastors preached about checking on the people who check on everyone else. Men who never said "I'm hurt" started saying it. One supporter posted, "We all shared his art, but not his burdens." That is perhaps the most accurate summary of this case. We examine true crime for insight, not spectacle. So let's address the darkest part of this for his family. They did not bury one child in 2 years. They buried 2 generations of hope. A grandchild in January 2024. A son in July 2025. Psychologists say losing a child increases mortality risk in surviving parents dramatically, especially fathers who tie their identity to parenthood. That statistic lived and died in this case. Family statements were full of shock and guilt. Private circles described feeling helpless. They knew he was hurting. They just didn't know how much. One relative said, "He never asked for help. He thought he had to hold it together." That belief, that strength means silence, is exactly what organizations later called deadly conditioning. There were 2 funerals, but countless awakenings. young men began talking in community spaces about loss without shame. Artists formed coalitions around mental well-being instead of just art production. Parents who had buried children came forward to support one another, something that rarely happened openly before. Youth workers used Donno's story to teach teens that pain doesn't disqualify you, hiding it does. He became a mirror, forcing people to see themselves, not as spectators, but as participants in a shared human experience. This case isn't sensational for shock value. It is chilling because of what it reveals. People capable of saving others often cannot save themselves when they don't feel allowed to break. So I'll ask you directly, because that's what storytelling does. Do you check on the people who seem strongest around you? Do you read between the lines when someone starts talking differently? Do you ask, "Are you okay?" even when it feels uncomfortable? Those questions, not autopsy reports, are why this story matters. Months after his passing, community leaders launched support circles in memory of Donno and Razik. Not vigils, ongoing conversations. When cities turn murals into dialogue, something powerful takes shape. Hope, not the naive kind. The gritty, rebuilt kind born from ashes. That was his final contribution. Not art, but awareness. Donald Big Boss Donno, Curtis didn't leave a mystery behind. He left a message that grief untreated becomes fatal silence, that a father's love can save a man, and his loss can break him in unseen ways. But grief isn't where his story ends. His legacy, murals, music, mentorship, conversations, continues where his voice stopped. And now it sits with us. So tell me, what would you have said to him if you'd read that final post in time? What do you believe communities can do for people who feel alone and lost? Comment below. Your thoughts could help someone else watching this who carries their own unseen storm. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Not for views, but because someone out there may need to hear this message today. This is True Crime Watch HD. Thank you for watching. And remember, check on the strongest people you know.